Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the La Blue Girl of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka dressing up as Abath for Halloween by going to the party, getting drunk, pissing everyone off, and then leaving early.
Nice. It's that's the true Blasherkian way. And I'm the black metal guy, aka new Bloodborne playthrough as Glenn Danzig.
You did a pretty capable rendition of him.
Thank you. I sent the death metal guy a screen cap. It's I spent about at least 20 minutes playing with the sliders, and I managed to get his massive jaw and his sort of aggressively protruding brow.
The proper Cro-Magnon quality.
Yes, but the real challenge is that I can't play with upper body armor because he has to be shirtless at all times.
Yeah, it's role playing as Glenn Danzig is interesting. Maybe I need to start a character, and I'm going to invade your world as the vocalist of the Northside Kings. We'll just see what happens.
I'll have to, yeah.
We'll both go unarmed.
No fisticuffs. Yeah.
All right, guys. I know it's been a little while since you've heard from me. Obviously, I'm down in Florida, so I had multiple hurricanes to deal with and a bunch of other bullshit. But we're back on track now for, inshallah, that there's no more major storms this season. Little bit of housekeeping up front. Follow me, the Death Metal Guy, on Facebook at Terminus Podcast. Follow the Black Metal Guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal. If you were particularly dedicated, subscribe to us on Patreon, where $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle, which is our private Discord server where the major recent topics of conversation have been fine art photography and early 2010s hip-hop, so I think we've got something for everyone there. And then after that, I'm going to do something that I haven't done in a while, which is a mini review. I've been kind of leaving that to the Black Metal Guy, one of our little half-blind or half-deaf listen mini reviews. But a buddy of mine came out with something recently that I figured was worth talking about. So this is an EP from a project called Keroeis, or I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce it. I was hanging out with the main guy at a party the other day, and he said it, but I'm totally blanking. But Keroeis, something to that effect. It is titled Priestess Emanations, and it is an independent release on Bandcamp. So this is from a good friend of mine down here named Wormwood. He is the lead guitarist and vocalist of the sort of black grind band Tunnels of Set, which we covered 2-3 years ago on the show, something like that.
I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, it's like...
Have they changed their name?
No, that was the first release.
I remember a black grind band.
Maybe it was still called Merciless Scum back then.
Yes, it was.
Yes, Merciless Scum. They're now called Tunnels of Set, and this is a side project of his. We've got Wormwood. He's sort of the guitarist and main songwriter, as far as I know. The bassist from Tunnels of Set is also featured on this, and the drummer is Furia, who is the drummer from another local black metal band called Pontifex, who do kind of Sargeisty, kind of USBM type stuff. As usual, I'll always kind of caveat these reviews with, these are all personal friends of mine, so, just no foolies. These are all people that I know personally. But I wanted to bring this on the show because I think this is probably the best material that I've heard from Wormwood, my buddy, and it's pretty interesting. So he released a demo a couple years ago, just a little 2-track thing that was pretty cool and pretty off-center from what I typically hear from him. it's I described it to him as sounding like some of the weirder, more offbeat USBM that we heard back in like the mid 2000s. You know, not the Leviathan Zasther idea, something a little bit closer to second wave or orthodox stuff, but playing around a lot more with tempos, a lot of really fast stuff next to really slow, doomy stuff, and a really dissonant but like pretty mystical atmosphere. You know, it's not just pure chainsaw atonality, it's actually sort of playing around with highly dissonant riffs in the manner of early orthodox stuff, and I thought it was really cool. So now there is a 6-track EP out, again titled Priestess Emanations, and it's a little bit of a stylistic shift, but I think it's pretty interesting. What I find really interesting is that this sounds to me like a lot of stuff that I think he probably doesn't listen to a whole lot. So Wormwood is a little bit younger than us. I think he's like 28-ish. You know, got into black metal as like a late teen or something, and he's been playing in bands ever since. What this really strikes me as sounding like is like an updated orthodox influenced take on something like Old Black Funeral. It's got the...
Okay, that's what I was going to ask about. Yeah, black... So, the sort of the jank and melodic color of early Black Funeral.
Yeah, it has that that sort of proto-DSBM quality that you would get from a record like Empire of Blood, but it doesn't really sound Euro in the way that you might expect, despite the influence from like Orthodox, a little bit of post-black, but I think that's mostly just post-black technique filtered through Orthodox. I don't think he's really into that kind of stuff. As well as just the... that US quality that positions it off-center from more traditional Euro styles. There's like this little hint of grind and death metal and hardcore in there, really, really underneath the surface, but enough to really set it apart from a lot of its contemporaries. There's a couple ambient tracks. They're fine. They should be on one of these kinds of USBM releases. You know what I mean. But there's about 4 full-length tracks on this that I think are pretty good. It's not 100% even yet. I think this is a project that's still kind of in its gestation phase, but I think it's pretty promising, and I wanted to bring it on the show, and I'm interested to hear your opinions. So, with that, let's go to a track called The Crossroads Queen. This is around the middle of the song. These song structures are kind of interesting in that they're narrative, but also very horizontal, and it seems like the most interesting stuff tends to be like right in the middle of the track. These aren't songs that are invested in super dramatic peaks or valleys of energy, which kind of adds to like that gray DSBM quality. Although I think that, Wormwood, my buddy, he's really into the occult, so I think that's really the idea here. I don't think this is really meant to sound depressing, but I know that he's into a lot of French and Finnish stuff, so it's probably bleeding out that way. So let's go to The Crossroads Queen, check that out, and I'll get your thoughts. Yeah, so it has a sort of a vague resemblance to a lot of stuff, but this seems kind of distinct. It's sort of, to me, it's like playing with almost like post-black or orthodox style arrangements, but like the riffing content itself, like the actual melodic content, seems pretty different. What do you think?
I don't, I think this sounds pretty, I think the post-black and orthodox things, this sounds much more just like underground and garagey to me than either of those labels would suggest. I like this a lot. This might be one of those things you bring on the show that I like more than you. I certainly hear the comparison to the old primitive USBM. I finally have gone back and been listening to like Judas Iscariot stuff. So I finally listened to all or most of Heaven in Flames. It's pretty cool.
It's so good.
It's so cool. I think, unfortunately, it would have had more impact on me if I'd heard it earlier.
Yeah, that's definitely like a teenage or early 20s album to hear.
Yeah, it would have been like, it fills the niche right just between Transylvanian Hunger and the first Satanic War Master record.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It really finds a nice niche right there.
Yeah, but it certainly his insistence on some of the gnarlier harmonies and also the sort of Judas Iscariot has great sort of anti-musicianship, and I kind of hear that here, and I mean that only as a compliment. The jankiness in the playing is very live. The drums are in some ways all over the place, but much more interesting because of that.
Well, the drumming's really interesting because it's. What's happening is there's this like very, very concerted effort to not play straight blasts or straight thrash beats. There's like the kick patterns are always something like weird and sort of based off these quick little like double note flurries and stuff. It's very
You're
strange.
Right. Okay. Which is probably what makes it tricky to play.
Yeah. There's
Sorry, go.
Oh no, it's just there's this because it sounds sort of off time at first. I mean, and this is definitely like it sounds like it's not done to a click track or whatever. But then you listen, it's like, oh, it's just the kick patterns are all over the map. She's really trying to not play anything just like straight 4/4 there, which I think is an interesting sort of like deliberate restraint on writing.
Yeah, it's very creative playing. And yeah, now that makes sense. There's just like weird. It's like the average blast beat is like something like that. They're kind of like it's kind of pulsed, and there are these extra. Basically, like the snare is doing blast beat things, but there's all these extra bass drum things happening. Yeah, so the drumming is cool, and the guitar is well suited to it, right? You can follow. You never get lost because the guitar is clean enough that you can follow the riffs, but they're tuned into each other and following the same sense of more like organic time rather than click time. So I think, rhythmically and tempo-wise and all that, it's very interesting. And the melodies are super cool, too. I think more than post-black or whatever, I see what you mean, because they have this kind of dreamy aspect to them. This reminds me of two very specific things. If he's into occultism and Finnish black metal, these might actually be reference points. On our Discord, they come up periodically. Have you ever heard Keroeis or Rahu?
No, I think I've heard the names, but I'm not familiar.
Yeah, so this is that like little niche of other Finnish black metal, right? That isn't quite like, that has something to do with Satanic War Master and something to do with Archgoat, but isn't really either of them. The guy from Keroeis is also in, I think does Venus Star, which is much more like war metal-y, and Circle of Ouroboros, which is weird. He also is in Rahu. So basically, Rahu and Keroeis have this kind of like dreamy, gauzy guitar tone that's probably influenced somewhat by like goth or ethereal music, but it's all tremolo black metal stuff. And it seems like the default chords in the more lyrical passages, especially towards the end of the sample on the Keroeis, they have this sort of there's like this sort of highly consonant tones, but there's like really tense kinds of tight intervals under them. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. Like seconds and fourths in the chords in ways you wouldn't necessarily expect. There's sort of gliding tensely.
Yeah, there's a lot of resistance to sitting on power chords here, because I'm pretty sure that Wormwood is a big like old DSO guy. So I think that he might be, it might be coming from that.
Oh, yeah, or like Infernal Battles.
Yeah.
Has really cool harmonies on it. So yeah, I could certainly hear that. Like it's like if you took Infernal Battles and made it more sort of dreamy. I think it's cool, and I think that kind of the more grindy stuff at the beginning was quite interesting too. You know, you have those kind of like pulsing 3-note phrases, and then they kind of there's that kind of modular grindy songwriting there where you have one insistently repeated 3-note phrase sort of morphs into another without really changing the riff per se. And there's a bit of that kind of Eastern harmony that you would get in 90s black metal, even in stuff like Judas Iscariot or whatever. That sense of like exotic mysticism, or like this has something to do with Paimon Gate, right?
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from on that. Like the implementation is very different, but there's something spiritually similar.
Yeah. Yes. Implementation is totally different, but the atmospheres and some of the note choices. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let me go to one other. My favorite track is this next one called The Oniric Womb. And this is where it gets a little bit more into like decidedly, something like DSBM, but really more kind of like a straight Black Doom thing. I mean, this feels like it goes way back to the 90s. Again, really weird chording, a lot of repetition, but really clever kind of rhythmic variation and variation in strum patterns that breathe a lot of life into a relatively simple melodic line. that's an interesting one, because you've got that really protracted, very Judas Iscariot middle part, like the most DSBM parts of Heaven in Flames, as you mentioned. But then, it's almost kind of the riff that opens the sample is very much like a newer Demon Sea riff. And then the last one is sort of like a straightforward second wave phrase, but with that really ugly death metal turnaround at the end of it. I don't know, it's really interesting the way this guy shapes these riffs. And I know that, him and I, like, we're into pretty different things in black metal, and I know that this guy is into stuff like, I believe he's into, like, Cult de Ghoul, Void Meditation Cult, stuff like that. A lot of this, like, sort of somber, doomy black metal, and I'm wondering if some of these weirder ideas are pulling from those bands who I've just never had as much interest in.
Dude. The blah, da, 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 that was cool. That's a, I feel like something like that really does work as a big riff. It itself is not particularly elaborate, but it's foregrounded strongly, and it's interesting enough to hold your attention. Obviously, the stuff at the beginning is kind of like, it's using very troped note choices at the beginning, but what really makes it is the odd kind of elongated timing, and then that those more fleshed out and hovering chords at the end. But that to me really sounds like a Branicald riff, or something you could have heard on the Sternatus record.
Oh yeah, no, that is true. Just those strange, like, complex, glassy chords just getting suspended for a weirdly long time.
Yeah, you play something that's like a folk riff, a fragment of a folk riff, right? Like a Graveland riff caught in the middle. Just this blah, da, 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 kind of gestural stuff. But you do it in this really weird way. And then, yes, you have these glassy, suspended chords, yes, as the way of ending the phrase without really turning it around. Yeah, I liked that part a lot, and I also really like how at the end of this sample it just breaks out into a sort of thrash beat. The double bass part in the last sample was also very effective. There is a lot more attention to rhythmic change-ups and sort of shifts in mood than you would expect in something this sort of lo-fi and atmospheric.
Hi, this is Taylor from Crushing the Scepter, and you're listening to Terminus Podcast.
All right. And we are back with our first full review of the night. This is Deadform with Entrenched in Hell, out now on Tankcrimes Records, a label that is pretty important in the sort of crust and metal punk and raw punk side of things, based out of Oakland, but that we have not had much occasion to mention on the show. This is the sort of thing I kept up with more back in the day. But I should shout out our buddy Meatman of the Death Metal Shitposting page for putting me onto this. This is a super group of Oakland crust dudes, or Stenchcore guys. And it is, this is such a niche style, right, that there are only a handful of releases in it every year, and only one or two of them would ever be worth checking out. So obviously, my great love for this stuff, so we got to bring it on the show. Members of the band are important. So on drums and vocals, we have Dino Somese, formerly of current TikTok favorites Dystopia. Dystopia, a sort of pretty legendary band who imported the heavy, slow, mid-tempo stench sound from the UK to the US in the 90s. You actually know them better than me, but that's a fair characterization, right?
Yeah, I mean, for the metal audiences, they are part of that wing of sludge that is a little more closely affiliated with crust punk than metal typically, although they themselves straddle the line.
Yeah, basically a lot of stuff that sludge is a branding term used for a lot of things that we could just call crust punk. It really depends. I remember Dystopia having some of the Deviated Instinct UK stench stuff, some of the sort of nausea US peace punk adaptation of it, and also some kind of jump to fuck up riffs. Is that?
Yeah, to a degree.
All right. I probably skipped the slowest parts, so I don't remember the stuff. So formerly of Dystopia, and also Noothgrush, which is you're probably familiar with.
Yeah, Noothgrush are cool.
Really extreme doom sludge stuff. Kind of, I mean, they didn't make it on your Torture Doom episode, but it's not in a totally different. It's sort of like Moss.
Yeah, they're super noisy.
Yeah. And actually, most important to me, Asunder, this other, not supergroup wouldn't exactly be the right word because these people were all earlier in their careers, but a really interesting band of people who basically followed the crust to death doom trajectory, but in the US, and it's people doing a full-on sort of American funeral doom band. Asunder is really underrated and extremely good.
Yeah, they're very good.
Yeah, just genuinely majestic. If you like, skepticism and maybe wish they had even a few more chugs, that's good. The other, on bass and vocals, we have Brian Close from Stormcrow, who were another one of the big Oakland crust bands, alongside stuff like Skaven. And I can't remember if Skaven were Oakland, but they were West Coast. Honestly, these cities bleed together for me. I feel like Oakland is a suburb of Portland, is a suburb of Seattle. And then Judd Hawk from a band called Laudanum, who I don't know. Do you know Laudanum?
Not familiar.
Yeah, another sludge band. So basically, what makes this band distinct? I would say that compared to their past bands, which are basically like slower, crushing, minimalist metal, basically, this has a much more prominent goth influence and a noisier guitar tone. More of a sort of less of the sort of condensed heavy tone you would get on something like Stormcrow, not as bludgeoning, and more of like a big but sort of crumbling and heavily distorted sound. And yeah, there's a lot of kind of sort of eerie, reverb-laden, often kind of single string, kind of goth and death rock guitar all over this. I think this is pretty cool, and I am glad we found it this year. And yeah, what do you make of it?
I like the most metallic stuff on this, I guess. So this whole style of so I know you were saying that like sludge is sort of rebranding of a lot of stuff that could just be more rightly called crust punk. That's fair. I would also kind of argue though that there's like two sides of sludge. There's a more distinctly metallic side and a more distinctly punk side, sort of in the same way that grindcore, you can have a grindcore band that is either a metal band or a punk band. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And the crust side of sludge is something that I've never gotten that into. Dystopia, I like sometimes. I think that it has... I think it has real issues, and it necessitates you meeting it in the middle in a really intense way. I'm usually, like, pretty okay with that artistically, but I think it demands a lot from the listener to take seriously sometimes. My preference in Sludge has always been on the more metallic side, you know, your Crowbar, your I Hate God. Even though all kinds of hardcore people love I Hate God, that's, like, distinctly a metal band to me. Even stuff like Buzz Oven, that, again, kind of crusty, still not really the same, because if you go to some of the kind of, like, sludge doom bands coming from the crust scene, like a band like Grief, never got that into that. The Deadform record really straddles the line. I think that it has moments that are distinctly more metal and distinctly more crust punk, and my verdict pretty much just follows along that trajectory. I like the more metal stuff. I don't really like the more crust punk stuff. I think that people who are more dedicated to this style in general will probably find a lot to like, because yes, this bears a ton of resemblance to, again, stuff like Dystopia, stuff like Stormcrow. It's probably never gonna be my thing unless it gets more completely metallic, and I guess that's okay. I guess it's just funny that Deadform in many ways imports all of the best and worst aspects of Dystopia and a lot of the other associated bands to me. And I'm wondering at this point if those things that I don't like about the style are really just kind of inherent to it, and I just need to deal with that.
Well, one thing it doesn't import from Dystopia, the reason I never listened to Dystopia, right, was the kind of snotty, moralizing tone of it. Right?
Yes, that is the problem with Dystopia, really.
Yes, and it's linked to certain things about the vocal performance and all of that. But basically, this band... thankfully does not have that. I mean, obviously these guys are a lot older, and I have no idea who was the vocalist in Dystopia. Mm-hmm. But, this stuff is sort of, it's political, but, mostly just like, hey, nuclear apocalypse bad. It doesn't have the sort of self-righteous quality of the older stuff. Nuclear apocalypse lyrics in crust punk might have seemed passé 20 years ago. A little less so now. Right? Nuclear apocalypse is in. So I think there's a relevance of this record that I can appreciate. But yes, there are a number of things that are, some of the reservations you have about the record, I obviously totally understand. So we'll get into it. I'm just going to start off with the first track. This is a good example of the whole Stenchcore thing, because by metalhead standards, this is extraordinarily simplistic riffing. I like it a lot, but this is basically this riff is it's basically built around a single riff, at least for the first part of the sample. And it has the simplicity of an Amoebics riff on a rise. So it's very, very stripped down stuff, but I think it shows you how much life there is just in chugging the root note and hitting the octave. All right, so that is just a good example of a barreling Stenchcore groove. But it actually is a little more complex than I led people to believe. So you have the main riff is you have the driving mid tempo. It drops to halftime and becomes a little more greasy and sludgy. You get the and then the riff changes in the middle of the breakdown. The breakdown sort of morphs from a sort of a pretty traditional kind of like highly syncopated halftime throwdown thing into this kind of rolling double bass and tom thing that you get on tracks like Slaves in Arise, or that's really big for Axe Grinder. And as they do that, the riff changes. They start introducing more tritone stuff, and then the riff reverses. It loses the upward motion and becomes a downward motion, and it starts winding up. That sort of that kind of like extremely simple chording, but rhythmic openness, structural openness, kind of jammy quality. Jammy not in the sense of doing the same thing over and over again, but in the sense of like organically changing. That's very important to this sort of stuff. And it relates to the pit energy in it. And so you get this series of wind-up riffs, and then we're back into another chug riff, and it's not actually... One could reasonably expect it to be the same chug riff, but it is not. You get this and the riff actually, it has this sort of it's back at the grooving mid-tempo, but it actually changes root note in a way that the first riff certainly didn't. And this is all extremely simple, but there's a way of writing this song where it is literally two riffs, right? And you might not like this version, but I guarantee you would really hate that version.
I think this sort of thing is a case for me where sort of like you have problems with certain like no man's land doom death tempos that we talk about. This is sort of in a no man's land of riff complexity for me, where it's like it's a little too active to be like totally retarded like mongoloid crushing music, but it's like it's like too simple to like really engage my ear. It's like I kind of want something either more complex or more purely simplistic at the same time. And I think that it's like part of it is that like the added technicality, of which there is in this, precludes them from going like as noisy and crazy on the timbres as I might want this to be. But these opening two tracks that you sample are the ones that I especially don't like, and I think that the record picks up after them. But I think really we're also just looking at a sort of riffing style that you have a lot of inherent interest in, especially, sort of coming up with that Stenchcore style that I don't have that sort of relationship with.
Totally, man. I understand that. It's yes, it's I can see why, like, you understand something like Amoebics in that it approaches the sort of it has the same austerity as, like, Mortician.
Well, yeah, Amoebics is a black metal band,
Yes, Amoebics is a black metal band, right? It's like Vaughn or whatever. You can dig that, and spiritually it is a black metal band, obviously. So I mean, and then, this doesn't have that direct appeal to a metalhead.
I think I've also always kind of wondered about bands like this, where it's supposed to be, highly political and very like sort of like pessimistic about its outlook in modern society and humanity at large, but it like kind of wants you to dance at the same time, and I've never been able to square that circle, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's a well, I mean you know, there's lots of. I mean, Cannibal Corpse is extremely fun music, right?
Oh, Cannibal Corpse is a party band, though.
Yeah, but the lyrics are all about, you know, like mutilating hookers. Right?
Yeah, but
which to be fair that's someone's definition of a party.
It's someone's definition of party, and it's also, you know, Cannibal Corpse does, you know, horror movie stuff.
Right.
They're just extremely good at it.
Right, I see what you mean. Okay, there's better examples of this, I think, but you know, there are death metal bands with extremely gruesome and depressing kind of subject matter that are also fun. But I do sort of get what you mean. I mean, I think punk in general has those kinds of built-in tensions, right? It's like, it's aggressive power music, but it's anti-power and you know, anti-aggression. It's super pessimistic and dark, but it's also, you know, it's also fun and communal. Yeah, there's I can sense that. Or rather, you could say that the pessimism is I think what it is that a certain kind of very strident pessimism is the closest you can get within the language of punk to a certain kind of metal feeling.
Okay, I can kind of perceive that.
You can't. It's the furthest you can. Basically, it's the furthest you can get from having kind of snotty political lyrics, but you can't quite make the transition into embracing the darkness, right? You just have to be very right. A lot of Stench is stuck in that position where it's sort of staring at this apocalyptic bleakness and nominally being terrified by it, but obviously being obsessed with it and thinking it's cool.
Which is why, you know, we always talk about how, like, Amoebics is like the Stench band that, like, crosses the Rubicon, and it's like, oh, this is actually awesome, you know, or right. Discharge or something.
Yes. Well, yeah, no, Discharge has that tension in it, and then Amoebics, right? Discharge clearly, yes, this is my bit about it, right? It's like, yeah, Discharge sings drunk with power and obsessed with death, and that is clearly what they are. Amoebics crosses that Rubicon, ironically, before any of the bands influenced by them, and almost, you know...
and most of the bands
nobody else has taken them up on that challenge.
Yeah. So I think that we're getting at...
I guess, Rich Walker from Solstice. Solstice comes out of exactly that same process, right? He was in Sore Throat and all that, and then... basically made the same moves as Amoebics.
Yeah, he just ends up realizing war is actually cool.
Swords are cool.
So I guess kind of like pertaining to that, I think this record is best at its most miserable and doomy. So I want to go to the track The Exit, which is the third song where it really picks up for me. This is very in the vein of Dystopia. It's got a little bit more stoner groove. It was sort of a la High on Fire, but it still conveys the sort of like grandiose stuff that Dystopia, or more to the point, Stormcrow would get into. So let's check that out. So I was trying to find the words to express why this is why I prefer this to the sample that the black metal guy played. But then while it was playing, he just said, "Oh, this is an In Battle There Is No Law riff." And that pretty much just explains it. This is Bolt Thrower, so that's why this is good.
Yeah, well, I was telling the death metal guy while we were listening to it, it's just like, I think that for this particular, basically there's a whole style that you could call mid-tempo chug music that I am generally a big fan of, and the death metal guy, as a dyed-in-the-wool death metal guy, is not, simply because it's kind of a bastardized death metal idea. So Bolt Thrower for him is the exception that confirms the rule, right? Mm-hmm. Bolt Thrower are essentially, you know, a stench band, and the stuff that sounds like that is going to appeal to him most. You liked that Fatum record too, because it had a lot of that early Bolt Thrower stuff on it.
Yeah, I think this style is to me so weird, and I think that sort of that scans for a lot of the sort of broader metal punk stuff that you bring on the show. It's like, you know, that thing that I always express about Jism, where it's like, I expected it to be crazier, you know, and it is certainly crazy in its own way, but it's not one that scans to a guy who basically like never had a punk background like me. So I think that, yeah, Bolt Thrower is probably the single best articulation of this style to me. And anything else is just sort of like asymptotically approaching that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think Amoebics and Bolt Thrower are like the origin and the end of it. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's not coincidental that, you know, Bolt Thrower also sort of crossed that same line into becoming truly a metal band spiritually. Yeah, I don't think that's a coincidence. And they are obviously by far the most technical stench band.
Yeah.
It's But yeah, I like this. One thing I really like about the riff here is they do that sort of escalating chug pattern, and then the turnaround is dum 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 dum. You would expect them not to hit the open octave again there at the end, but they do, which somehow feels really ignorant to me.
Yeah, that's definitely like the best kind of this style of riff to me.
Yeah, and you know, on a record like this, that's what I want a lot of, is just stuff that I can just headbang to, basically, right? Mm-hmm. It's headbanging music. And you know, like, the funny thing about Stench is if you changed 3 notes and the accent of the singer and threw in some leads, it would be Pantera. It appeals to the same basic need.
Yeah, that's fair. I love the irony of how much they would hate that description.
Yeah. It's this one is basically like, we focused once I saw the death metal guys picks, I'm like, hey, I liked the first couple tracks, so I figured we would highlight the difference between the ones we're picking, right? So, like, what somebody with a punk background likes on here versus what the death metal guy does. So, although your sample was great, I like that, might be one of my favorite parts on the record. Mm-hmm. So here's one that's probably going to be an even tougher sell for you than the first track. I remember
this one being my least favorite by a wide margin.
Yeah, so this is basically kind of a... this record has one thing that's cool about, I think, the sound on this record. I hear what you mean, that it could be more abrasive, but I do really like the sound quality here. And the independently audible bass is important. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of the...
I do love the bass tone on this.
Yeah, bass tone is great. I think it works well. If you had a more solid, crushing guitar tone or something, or more noisy, it might eclipse the bass. So... it's you know, the bass, a lot of the coolest moments are where the bass and guitar are working together, And they certainly do that on this track, which is basically a goth song. And with the sort of duka thing, you're going to be like, oh, it's the killing joke that's at the root of amoebics and stench in general. There is that, but the guitar playing is rather different, and we'll get into that after. But people who have listeners, you will have heard parts like this on certain kinds of metal records, and I think here you're going to hear it a little closer to the source. So what we can agree on there is that change up at the end with those big sort of like that big sort of drop to the minor sixth, the more epic sounding part is very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's obviously the highlight here.
Yeah. That's almost like Black Sabbath Paranoid too. Mm-hmm. But that's just very basic. Here is what basic heavy metal kicks there. And that's what prevents the track from becoming kind of a stale exercise in riding a groove. But I think what they do in the main groove of the track is cool too. It's what the guitars are doing is, it's kind of like Killing Joke, but really it's a lot more like isolated single string picking, like. Well,
I mean, to me, what kills that for me is that it really reminds me, probably because of the similar root and goth stuff, that whole like, ooh, we're plucking the close intervals together, just reminds me of some of the most troped parts of like ortho-BM.
Yeah, or also like bad black metal knockoffs of it, like Amazers or whatever. But I would say that this is a much better delivery of that sort of thing. And it's there's a simple but clear melodic idea, unlike some of the more incoherent, spooky arpeggio stuff you get in like an ortho band. But and it gets passed around, right? A lesser band would just sit on that riff, basically, without maybe change a root at one point in a predictable way. But it gets moved around the fretboard in a cool way and layered, and you get different melodic versions with the same rhythmic shape, sort of crossing over each other and interacting in cool ways. And he's doing cool guitar stuff. There might be some potential for that. There might have been a potential for even more of that, but I do really like the way that he lets the guitar ring and feed back, and there's a pretty cool dramatic bend right before it goes back into the main groove at the end of the sample.
Well, yeah, I mean, this style is necessarily highly constrained writing, and I get that. I guess I'm just kind of wondering, it's like, has there ever been like a really technical stench band? It's like, what happens if you kind of like unmoor this style from its technical limitations, and like, can we do really complicated versions of these riffs?
It just becomes, I mean, I think one answer to that question is it becomes Bolt Thrower and Peaceful Death Doom.
That's fair.
Right? Like, that just is what it is. It's like, I mean, the goth parts are not the same kind of simple grooves, but the goth parts are totally intact in that stuff. And maybe more prominent. There might be some other interesting answer to that question. I think Rich Walker's, I think Saw Throat is kind of a technical stench band, but I haven't listened to the full record. It's an interesting question. I think basically what would happen, though, is that people would hear it. This was the problem. Every time this music crosses a certain... It's like, when you're doing a style like this, you are almost deliberately freezing history at a certain point, and you can try to add your own creative touch on it, but there's only so much you can do, because it's this... you're dealing with, like, this... really generative but transitional thing, right? I mean, another example of a more technical, like, not more complex but more focused on technique version of this is Godflesh.
Which of course I love.
Neurosis, right? Or Neurosis. Basically, I think this style is super generative, and it produces UK Death Doom, Godflesh, Neurosis, and those are all bands that metalheads know and love. Not under the name, but they're all stench bands and have exactly the same kind of aesthetic structures and preoccupations as the stench bands. It's just much bigger canvas, right? But yeah, to do something like this that's intricate, I feel like people would hear it as like, I don't know, like progressive death metal or something. Right? Yeah. Yeah, or I don't know, like, there's a version of doing this that's intricate that just becomes like Tool. Like, Tool is not a million miles away from this stuff.
That's fair, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Maybe I can start a technical stench band. Problem is, I would have to know how to play guitar. Yeah, man, I'd have to get better at guitar and stop getting fucked up all the time. Nah. All right. So on that note, as far as the sort of the gothy stuff coming into this, and these kinds of like rumbling eighth note grooves that probably are not going to be a metalhead guy's favorite, this record has a lot of basically not very metal crust punk feeding into it. And a really important band for that we never mentioned on the show is Rudimentary Peony, which is this kind of, classic kind of madman auteur band. Came out, British, came out of the whole crass scene at roughly the same time as Amoebics. Basically a solo project, plays sort of extremely schizophrenic in a way that was artistically productive, and has this kind of there's something quite annoying about the vocals and lyrics, but there's something authentic to it. It has a under the sort of PC sermonizing, and there's a sort of wretched gutter prophet, and his resentment is at least sort of it's more primordial. There's the guy in rags, like running. The rudimentary Peony guy's presence is kind of like the guy in rags running alongside the royal procession, screaming that, woe to the mighty or something. At its best. We're going to listen to Rotten to the Core from Death Church. And although this at its time was not very metal, I think you'll hear how it connects to a lot of metal. So yeah, In the Shadow of the Horns.
Yeah.
That is the In the Shadow of the Horns riff. Basically, like a whole, despite really not sounding like a metal band, right? Rudimentary Peony has this kind of like punk plus early goth and death rock vibe. Rudimentary Peony generates an entire kind of stompy sound that becomes really important in black metal. And I imagine just directly via Darkthrone. There are obviously stompy mid-tempo grooves of a different kind in both Venom and Bathory, and they contribute that, but this particular groove and just the general, if you listen to the whole record, a general kind of like pogo punk doop-dap thing. What?
Just you saying if you listen to the whole record.
Yeah, no, I know you're not going to listen to the whole record. Yeah, you hate this, right?
I'm having trouble articulating it. It's like I can imagine working at a bar and having a coworker who asks me what kind of music I listen to, and I say death metal, and he's like a 50-year-old guy, and he says, yeah, man, that's cool, but this is kind of what I'm into, and he shows me that, fully convincing me that, oh, he's gonna learn from this, there's a certain old punk guy who plays this for me, and, looks at me, nodding his head smugly while I listen to it, and I think I want that man to die.
Come on, God, answer me. For years I'm asking you why. Why are the innocent dead and the guilty alive? Where is justice? Where is punishment? Or have you already answered? Have you already said to the world, here is justice, here is punishment, here in me?
Hey! Jesus wept.
And we are back from various noisy and chaotic things occurring to discuss Überkill, the new one from Finnish legends Barathrum, out now on Hammer of Hate Records. Now, this is a band that has come up very tangentially on Terminus before, and it's in that list of sort of minor canonical bands that, you know, we want to talk about all of them at some point, right? So this is a long-running band with roots in the early 90s and a full-length out by 95, which for the Finnish scene is pretty early. I mean, aside from your Impaled Nazarenes and whatnot, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess the Finns would claim to be earlier than everyone. So,
yeah, of course.
Okay, maybe I can, maybe I'm now gonna they're gonna deny me entry at the airport. But basically, after your Impaled Nazarenes and Archgoats and whatnot, this is pretty early. And it, this is a band that I think has a very strong reputation in Finland and is something that you have to know if you're seriously interested in Finnish black metal, or at least have some idea of what they're about, which has basically been my case. They've always been kind of like a fuzzy dot on my map, right? Okay, I sort of know what Barathrum sounds like. It's good that we are exploring them more, but I think my guess is they have a big national cult following, and if you're a Finnish black metal guy, you show up to these shows and whatnot, but that if you are outside, it might be only a vaguely familiar name, or you might have never heard of them. So there's actually a lot to... This actually fits quite well with the Deadform, because it's a band that, for two reasons. A, it's lower mid-tempo chug music. It sits in this sort of odd window of tempos, and it's not like Stenchcore at all. It's coming from different things, but it has sort of similar ideas, right? Just and also because it is a continuation of a very liminal transitional style. And like Stench, because it's so generative, it's at the juncture of different genres. It's kind of hard to describe, or you can describe it in all sorts of ways. Just like the Stench bands turn into Godflesh and turn into Bolt Thrower and turn into Death Doom. The Barathrum you can link to, I don't know if they've been influential so much. Well, actually they have in one important way, but more like you can hear them intersecting with a ton of things that were happening back in the day. This has a lot to do with something like Samael, the early sort of mid-tempo chuggy Samael, or Passage to Arcturo, Rotting Christ, or probably the Czech bands like Root and Master's Hammer. It's kind of heavy metalish, slower, melodically colorful black metal that was modeled on more on your Celtic Frost and things like that. It has that, but it also has a lot of other connections that will come up as we do the review. And there actually have been maybe basically two Barathrum sounds that are all kind of the same, but there's a significant difference. So to give you an idea of what this band sounds like, let's try their 1995 record. This is their debut, Hailstorm. Puns are a theme here. This is In Darkness I Fly.
Oh, so it's Beherit.
Yeah, well, it's yes, I should have mentioned that. Very influenced by the slower Beherit stuff, but think about what it would have influenced.
Oh, well, obviously, like later on, Ride for Revenge, that whole circle.
Yes. So early Barathrum is extremely necro, and has this...
so yeah, does that even have a guitar, or...
I think at some points it does. And at some points you hear certain kinds of more heavy metal melodies coming in, but it is very focused on just crumbling, heavily distorted bass and these kinds of, like, it's quite down-tempo. And so you can hear how this becomes, yes, this sort of Finnish style of noisy, torturous, slow black metal. So yeah, that's important. Basically, Ride for Revenge comes from this early Barathrum, and from obviously the Beherit records at the time. But the Beherit stuff has this much more, chunky. The drawing down the moon guitar tone is almost like cubed, right? It's very, very loud, chunky, kind of MIDI. This has that sort of the fetid cavern of noise, and that swaying movement to it. So that's interesting. Then they change certain things and arrive at what I think is probably their definitive statement, and has defined the rest of their sound, which is Legions of Perkele in 1998. And you can hear, I think, how this is the same band, but like an evolution of it. So we're going to listen to a track with a pretty cool title. This is Revenge by Magic.
Yeah, and you can see where that feeds into the more death metal parts of early Impaled Nazarene.
Yeah, it has a lot in common with that. Basically, I would say this is slow Impaled Nazarene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very plausible.
Yeah, it shifts from this sort of like from like doomy necro hellhammer music to basically a down-tempo version, relatively speaking, right? Because Impaled Nazarene is insanely fast, but a down-tempo version of Ugra Karma or Suomi Finland Perkele. Mm-hmm. Right? The riffs get more sort of, they obviously have this sort of slashing heavy metal power chord vibe. They get more Aeolian scale, and they have more of the Finnish folk undertone. Mm-hmm. You can hear at this point, I think one reason Barathrum is big is, again, they're at the juncture of different styles. So on the one hand, they have to do with this, the sort of blasphemous Black Death side of Finland. And on the other hand, the sense of melody you can hear going to Satanic Warmaster. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's... but you can hear how this is also a really weird style, right? You're locked in at this.
Yeah, it's that, like, it's one of these. We have at this point, especially as guys from outside the country, really flattened Finnish black metal into Satanic Warmaster Sargeist. When in actuality, there's like 3 or 4 really distinct strains of Finnish black metal, but the rest of them don't tend to get over to the States as much, at least for like kind of standard stuff from the country.
Yeah, this is real a real Finn's Finn. And it's an odd style because, like, the entire song is basically those 2 riffs with a couple of variations. And, I find this sort of thing extremely satisfying. Basically, it has the sort of anthemic, thuggish quality of Impaled Nazarene, but at your fist-pumping mid-tempo chug, right? All right,
yeah, I can get into
around
that.
in my boots. Yeah, exactly. It's pretty cool. It sounds tough, and... It says sort of tough, confrontational, folkish, but also has that undertone of primordial, regressive 80s metal. And
you can hear like the triumph of death in there.
Totally. And like the Manila Road in it or whatever, right? But basically, like, this is lightning in a bottle, right? This is a great album, but it exists within these narrowly defined parameters. If this becomes the sound that defines the band, ironically, like the sound on the last sample on the first album, that sound can go in a lot of different directions, right? This sound, they've achieved, they sit at this weird, very singular spot between a bunch of different styles, and if you change it too much, suddenly you lose the trademarked sound, right? You can see why this record was a kind of a classic of its kind and is something people come back to, because there's nothing else like it. But if that is what defines the band's sound, there is very little room to maneuver. It's
very, it's, the first album is almost like it's equally spare, but it's more open to interpretation. This is like down, it's just as minimal, but it's like down a certain rabbit hole, and it's kind of hard to extricate yourself from it.
Exactly. It's extremely niche. I mean, if you add blast beats, it turns into Rotting Christ, right?
Yeah.
So there's not there's not a lot you can do. There's also a latent thrash quality to it. But again, the question is, what do you do with that? And so, yeah, the question a band like this faces is, where do you go from here? And I haven't listened to every record they did after this. They've done a lot. But I checked out, say, Venomous from 2002, which seems fairly representative. And, how they changed it, well, it's basically the same writing approach on Legions of Perkele, but they've added some more faster double bass, more overt thrashism. But it doesn't really change much, and in some ways it just makes it less brutish and heavy, right? You really can't write, it's very difficult. You can't write Legions of Pericula over and over again, but you also can't change it. This creates a conundrum, and I think this band has continued in large. My guess would be that they are scene fixtures, mainstays, people widely respected by dudes who know what they're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. And so, for that reason, they keep playing shows, they keep putting out records, and real heads show up for it. It does create a problem. So this new one is the first one since 2017's Fanatico. So it's been a while, 7 years, and they face this songwriting problem. Well, what do you do? Well, sometimes it can help to bring in some new blood. So enter Matthias from Seelenverholenen and White Rune. He is one of Terminus's, I guess you could say, a Terminus protagonist. We cover a lot of his stuff. He's sort of at this point a character on here, just like, the guy from Oldowan Gash might be or whatever. He has been playing live in Barathrum for a while. But at this point, they let him loose to write most of the material on here. And of course, he's known for having a style that has sort of very flashy heavy metal pyrotechnics, sophisticated melody, kind of almost verges on video game soundtrack at times, while also having an undertone of thuggish fighting street metal. And so that seems like a good... if someone can bridge this, okay, we've got a Barathrum is stompy, but it's also melodic. Let's see what we can do with this, right? And so basically, Matthias is presented with a musical puzzle that he needs to solve in some clever way. How can I revive this band and change the sound while still remaining true to this very classic, the classic Legions of Pericula sound, which we cannot, as fans of the band, we cannot betray, right? He enters this, I'm sure, as someone who's listened to the band a ton and seen them a ton, and the expectation is from him and from the band is that, okay, you've got to keep it classic, but also do something new. So really, this review is about, okay, how does he attempt to meet that challenge? I think, we'll put... Spoiler alert, a death metal guy. I think it's fair to say this is an impossible challenge.
Basically, yes. I think that it's incredibly difficult to be a guy coming into a band that's lasted as long as this, to simultaneously adhere to its own sort of inborn restrictions and also contribute something substantially new. I think you're going to end up falling on one side of that line or the other. And in this case, at least to my ear, Matthias really goes in the conservative direction on this. Clearly he's got, we've heard Matthias's work in other projects. He's got a lot of technical skill, and he's playing well under it. It's still, more sophisticated than the stuff we heard on those first couple samples, but inevitably it would be so many years later. But I think that he is trying to hew very close to, insofar as I understand it, the established style of this band, maybe leaning more heavily into the thrashy aspects.
Yeah, it's to make this work, you really have to transform it, and I just don't think he had the mandate for that, and as a classic fan of the band, he probably didn't want to. So so this record works. There's all sorts of interesting, cool stuff that happens on this record, and it often works best when it is being pushed, when you take this micro style that's so close to a bunch of other styles, and you just push it into those styles and see what happens, right?
Yeah, I think...
You just make... Yeah.
I think it sort of becomes inherently necessary when you're dealing with something very restrictive to like this to find something that's already in there and just lean into it harder than has been done previously. I mean, that's probably your best avenue. I think that's what Matthias tries to do here.
Yes, the tracks that work best are when he does that most. Anyway, let's start with a representative sample. Basically, this is Mountain of Bones. You'll hear here we are hewing very close to the Pericula formula with a couple, some variations and extras thrown in.
Separating flesh from neck bones. Os nasale, os maxillare, os lacrimale, os zygomaticum, os palatium. Clavicula, scapula, lo, and behold the mountain of bones. Lo, and behold the mountain of bones. Lo, and behold the mountain of bones. The mountain of bones.
So you can hear the song is organized around one barreling main riff. It, like the last sample we played, is basically a slow Impaled Nazarene riff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can see kind of like from the sample of Legions of Pericula, you can get here just by increasing the tempo, allowing a few more chords in the riffs, and really just kind of firing it off.
Yeah. So this is pretty much just like, I mean, a record like this should have some tracks just that are calling cards in the classic style. So this is that one. I also like that, the heavy part, the heavy part basically is a breakdown. It's like indistinguishable from a metalcore break, from good old integrity metalcore. Look and behold the mountain of bones.
What's interesting to me is that so this is in its own way heavy on Celtic Frostisms. And as we heard from the older material, Hellhammer as well. But what I find odd is that if you take the material from those older records, basically unvarnished, and just increase the tempo, you sort of naturally end up at just thrash circa 85, which I find really odd.
Yeah, but slow. It's still slow. By thrash, I mean for thrash industry. Or what thrash are you thinking of?
Oh man, I'm really what's weird is I get a big Kill 'Em All vibe off of this record.
No, that's kind of right. You have that sort of, but the rhythms I feel are all different. This has that sort of jaunty swung thing, kind of triplety.
Yeah, it's kind of Teutonic in a way, but the melodic content you can hear is sort of more heavily indebted than you would expect to NWO BHM, Hellbent for Leather type shit.
No, it does sound like some of the more grim songs on Kill 'Em All, and it has the way where even the way the main riff turns around, da 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 da.
It could even be
there's almost a brighter or perkier aspect of that turnaround than you might expect, and that's kind of a thing you would hear on Kill 'Em All.
Yeah, it could even be Fistful of Metal by Anthrax. Their very first record, which is still much more NWO BHM than where they would end up going.
Yeah, okay, so rhythmically different, but melodically very similar, I hear that. So, again, we're dealing with something that is a lot like Stenchcore. It's a simplified version of certain things in thrash and primitive death metal. One weird thing I heard in the breakdown here that kind of takes me out of it, I wonder if you have input on this. there's this like there's like an aftertone after every palm mute or something that sounds like whack, 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 whack.
Yeah, that's either just like hands on strings sliding, which is something that a lot of bands edit out, and it can just be more prominent depending on like EQ and pickups in the guitar.
Right.
Or he's doing a sort of like fully muted strum. Imagine the main riff on Smells Like Teen Spirit. Dung-ga-dung, chick-chick, you know? Mm-hmm. It could be that, just a sort of like muted strum pattern that he's tucking in there for a little bit of extra rhythmic effect. Not the sort of thing you hear nowadays. Like, really, like, not even really a metallic thing. More of a rock technique that you don't hear very often in the stuff that we cover.
Yeah, what it sounds like is when you're trying to record a guitar in a really, like, I'm an idiot, right? So when I'm trying to record a guitar, like, just, like, put on amp in a room, you can hear my pick on the strings rather than the sound of the picking coming through the amp. It sounds kind of like that.
This is almost certainly, I really doubt this is DI. You know, most of the stuff that we're hearing nowadays is recorded DI, just because it sounds so much better than it used to, and it's much more convenient. You don't have to fuck around with mic placement. But when you mic stuff, you get more of that, like, hand-on guitar noise, which can sometimes be good and sometimes be bad. It just depends on what you're going for.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's normally a thing I like, but this was it was a little odd. But still, I think that, that's a solid track, good homage to the earlier stuff. Let's see where they go from here.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to Spark Plugs of Purgatory. So one weird thing about this is Barathrum is, I guess, popularly understood to be or described as a Black Doom band, which is, like, I think not really correct. I think you can just have slow black metal.
Yes.
But with that,
I would say that's a Finnish specialty. The whole idea of slow black metal is basically a Finnish monopoly.
Yeah, and also, the Finns in general have always, at least to my ear, appreciated heaviness as a concept in black metal in a way that maybe the Norwegians didn't really appreciate, and the Swedes probably did to a lesser degree. But all Swedish black metal is like 20% death metal anyway, so, so the problem with that description is that it becomes an assumed part of the identity for the band. So, as a result, certain parts are inserted into these songs to, like, fulfill the promise of that description that I just don't think are very effective. So, on this track, we're going to open with a clearly, like, doom intro. But I don't think that doom itself was ever what the band was going for, and they just don't sound super engaged with it when they go for that. So as you can see, like the intro, the kind of doom intro there, which really sounds like Autopsy more than anything, is there to fulfill a task. You know, it's very unmoored from the rest of the song. It's just kind of there. You could delete it and the rest of the song would remain basically unchanged. And, you know, for listening to this record, I've been struggling to figure out, like, sort of what they're after. And I think part of it is, like, Sodom's in the Sign of Evil. You know, the sort of scrappy, thrashy and black metal delivery, the really yowling vocals, really makes me think of, like, the earliest Sodom stuff. And, you know, Sodom is, like, described, that really early material is described by some people as, like, a sort of, like, black speed metal or satanic speed metal thing. I mean, I don't think so. I think we're just getting extremely liberal with black metal terminology, you know, in the perception of the first wave, such as it is.
Well, I disagree. I think it is a black metal record.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine, but
I wouldn't call it black speed metal. Terms like that are I would say it almost sounds more like second wave black metal than many of the things at its time, because it has sort of more epic heavy metal melodies. Mm-hmm. It sounds like Impaled Nazarene in 1985.
That's fair, and there's no doubt that, you know, that super early Sodom stuff was definitely an influence on Imp Naz and other affiliated bands, but it just occurred to me listening to this that maybe that's one of the big things they're after on this record.
Interesting. Well, then I can hear that in terms of, like, that breakdown at the end especially, but wouldn't they have to, like, make it much like, it doesn't fit with the overall tempo vibe here?
Yeah, but Barathrum,
like, the whole point of that record is that it's like it's attempting to be very fast and it's, like, almost incoherent.
Yeah, but Barathrum is not allowed to go above a certain BPM, you know?
Right.
Like the structure of the band doesn't allow for it, and, like, the perception and understanding of the band doesn't allow for extremely fast stuff. So a compromise has been made, and unfortunately, that compromise kind of, like, sucks the wind out of what Sodom was doing. In this attempt to recreate it within this defined structure, it ends up losing that essence that makes those records so special.
Interesting. Yeah, I can hear what you mean, I think. Even the fast part here is sort of gestural, right? I like the idea of throwing in fast thrash riffs, but they would need to have a little more detail.
Mm-hmm. But again, it's like, we can't have that much detail.
Right.
Well, this is a band, you know, I had never heard Barathrum before this, and immediately upon listening to the record, I got the sense that this was I see that it's a long-running band, and this is like their 10th record or something. I'm like, This is a band that is struggling with, like, limitations that are inherent to it, that if they move too far away from, the fans would reject out of hand. And just based on hearing some of the earlier stuff, I think that essentially tracks.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to go to your next... Oh, wait, yeah, so the other thing we want to talk about, we may as well do it in the middle of the review, is the vocals.
Not into it, man. And it seems clear that the vocals have changed in an attempt to keep up with this, like, thrashier quality, but they're just not as good as, like, the really putrid, weird Beheretish stuff we heard earlier.
Yeah, I think this style of vocal, like, if you this style of vocal works best when it is extremely when there's, like, distortion or reverb on it, whether it's part of the mic setup or just part of the recording. and B, when the sort of the nasal harshness of it meshes with the other really off-putting timbres in the music, right? Like, a tone like this works best on the really early Barathrum stuff, and also on Legions of Percola, because it's a lot more raw. But here, it becomes clear, when you don't have that context for it, it is almost just more like a nasally thrash vocal, or a doom vocal, right? It's a little close to, not Ozzy voice exactly, but a more shouty and tonally even, right? So you're not like singing different notes really, but like a sort of warbling 80s doom vocal becomes this. I can see how his style was influential. The only other person from that time who was really doing something like this is Danny Filth, right?
Yeah.
Who I think was influential in Finland. But Danny Filth sounds different because he pushes a ton of air through. He produces a lot more fry, so it's a true scream. This is an 80s style black thrash vocal that's been sort of frozen in amber and preserved. And if you take away all the context for that, it just can sound kind of grating. And I know that for fans of this band that won't matter, right? The whole point is that the vocals might be a difficult pill to swallow. Okay, but it works better, ironically, when the rest of the music is a lot more unhinged.
Yeah. So let me get to one that I prefer. And this is one where very clearly you can tell, at least a little bit, they let Matthias, take the gloves off. So this is the end of Denial of God, and we're going to start with some pretty thrashy stuff, but then we're going to get in a much more melodic and, just to my ear, much more like definitively black metal direction. And you're going to hear stuff that is like unmistakably the work of Matthias, and I think these moments are the best parts of the record. So moments like that dot the record, and they are pretty much always some of the most exciting ones, because they really, break up what is largely oriented around pretty straightforward thrash riffs. It provides like a contrast that this music really needs now that it's operating at these tempos and it's not so starkly minimal. I just wish there was more of it. And I feel like when Matthias rips out a riff like that, a little, dual guitar simple but still elegant trem riff, I think it fits completely contiguously within what the band's trying to do. I just really wish there was more of it. I think just that little bit of added melody and drama does a lot to liven these tracks up.
Yeah, it works well in part because the band is doing this kind of classically Barathrum heavy sort of tom-laden breakdown under it as the trem riffs start layering, and then he brings in a more traditional, just sort of like death metal chug, like that subdivides everything much more. It's a very cool, it's a very cool passage. Well, so the other thing about the sort of vocal and approach is the lyrics. And of course, lyrics really don't matter very much on black metal albums, but they matter more on records like this one, where the vocals are not fully screamed and are pushed up front and very clear. And a lot of the lyrics here kind of rely on what I would say are like formulas, which can get a little stale. So, like, you know, they came from the east, they came from the south, they came from the north, they came from the west. Things like that. But he's more inspired when he's working in narrative territory. When there's a kind of a framework that he has to be telling a story. And the centerpiece of this record, here's something weird. Sort of the longest track on this record, clearly the centerpiece, is Dark Sorceress 3, parentheses, Spring Siege. This is the follow-up to the classic Dark Sorceress 1, Autumn Siege on Legions of Perkele. I assume there was a Winter Siege in between these.
We'll have a Summer Siege a couple albums from now.
Right. Summer Siege. A Summer Siege sounds like a tour package, right? Like Summer Siege. Oh God. So he's building a third part to a classic song, which was also kind of the centerpiece of Legions of Perkele, and probably the most doom moment on the record. Very slow, kind of monolithic. It really does sound like a crumbling fortress in the woods. And it has these lyrics, the original has these lyrics, they're sort of, graphically and in great detail illustrating all the evil that's going on here. And because you can hear because the vocals are a little more audible, it's pretty cool. It's a very, it's in the middle of the 90s, but it really feels like it's from 1986, basically. And so this is a follow-up to that. And musically, in some ways, it's pretty similar. But not really. It gives an opportunity for Matthias to do one of these dives further into the connected genres. And although, yes, I think characterizing this band as a black doom band is wrong, there is a connection to doom metal, and if you can activate that in a cool way, maybe you can get somewhere. So here, they take this weird sort of thing that's kind of like doom metal, this odd black, sort of slow black metal formula, and carry it towards real death doom in the English tradition. And I feel like this is probably the strongest whole track on the record, and we get more of the story of the Dark Sorceress.
Wanderers at those huge halls, and you can hear the echo of a zombie from the walls. Lurching corpses under the melting snow, all around her dark castle on the ice and shores. 7 soft sorcerers are too lazy to bury those hundreds of bodies exposed. Surrounding enemy forces, clarified by this view. Hundreds of burning corpses lying all around. Witchery and black magic, obviously been done. Evidence, bloodless corpses of the blood region.
All right, so that is, you can hear there at the end a real sort of gothic death doom lead in the style of the Peaceville bands, or probably more to the point, something like Swallow the Sun or Shape of Despair, right? It has a Finnish death doom or funeral doom adjacent vibe. There are several different riffs like that and a number of melodic elaborations, and those are very cool, and it's interesting to hear Barathrum moving in that direction, especially when those sort of elegiac doom riffs are juxtaposed with just a very busy sort of percussion section and these kind of jaw grooves. It's more sort of like headbanging old school metal grooves. That's all cool, and there is a lot more sort of charisma in the vocal performance here. You could hear it even at the beginning of the sample. He does that sort of like gurgle.
Yeah, there's something more theatrical about it, which I think suits this band.
Yeah, as you said while we were listening, it's basically he's trying to do kind of evil Candlemass.
Yeah, and I think that works for this band. I think that, honestly, listening to this and listening to the older stuff, these guys just seem much more comfortable at lower tempos. And that seems to be, in a large part, where some of the best material comes from. When it is given purpose and drive, like it is here, in contrast to the doomier part on my previous sample.
Right.
You can tell when they're full sending. And you can tell when they're just kind of writing songs. And there's a big gulf between those, and that makes this, like, clearly the best track on the record.